So, welcome to ICUJP. Good to have you here. First, I want to say that if you want to support the work that we're doing, there are various ways of contributing, all of which are linked to the email you got about this event. Okay, let's move to Rick, who's going to give us our reflection for today.
I hope this reflection is taken well by people because I kind of wrote this out of a little bit of frustration. Um, it's called $150. The human body is 70% water, the most precious substance responsible for life on Earth. The remaining 30% of it is carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, and about 100 other elements in minute quantities. The byproduct biochemical value of those substances in elemental form is about $150. So, in very stark, unfeeling, and in exceedingly capitalist terms, that's the value of a human body. Of course, there are mitigating factors that can change that valuation. If you're looking at the profitability of a person, an average American or European college graduate earns about $3 million in their lifetime. So does that mean that human life is worth a few $1 million in direct earning potential, or worth the taxes or the GOP contributions to that particular country that they live in? And of course, there is also the legal valuation of a human. So all the organs of a human body, like bone marrow, kidneys, cornea, heart, lung, liver, etc., in total can fetch up to $45 million on the black market. And the champions of that macabre study are the adjusters of different companies. As of right now, the value of statistical life, the number used by insurance firms, the judiciary, and employers to calculate the monetary payout in case of an untimely loss of life, is between $4 to $10 million for somebody's lifetime. So I bring up those stats and numbers because I think we should start to incorporate a few more calculations into that formula. So, because as far as I can tell, that tragic loss of life of 7 aid workers for World Central Kitchen were worth much more than the approximately 35,000 Palestinian lives lost in the region since September 7th. And in stark mathematical terms, that comes out to 5,000 times more. And, it's a cold, unambiguous mathematical problem, but that's where we are. And what accounts for that difference in valuation? Why does the world see these two groups of people in such stark contrast? I mean, it might be that we haven't spent decades making aid workers out as terrorists and enemies of the state, though I'm sure some think tank is modeling that out as we speak. I think those of us that have been following the history of the Middle East understand the narrative and how it's been shown to Americans through the binary, simple, low effort scribbling that has been the style of the US mainstream press for at least the last 30 years. So, remember, the fourth estate is part of that same capitalist meat grinder. And I'm sure that the raw material value of a press stenographer is much more expensive than a nice new AI program that can spit out inanities press run after press run. So you're probably going to see that happening more and more in the press. Our founder, our convener, George Regas, years ago, spoke very eloquently about another conflict, and his words are still very resonant today. The sin at the heart of this war against Iraq is your belief that an American life is more valuable than an Iraqi life, that an American child is more precious than an Iraqi baby. God loathes war. And I would agree, yes, God does loathe war, but multinationals love it. Thank you.
Great. Could you send me that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you very much,
great.
Rick.
That
Rick.
was really good.
Rick, don't send it just to Carol Francis. Please publish it on our website and send it out as today's reflection. So succinct, so uncompromising. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there affiliate reports that come out of ICUJP?
I did post the link tree for ICUJP earlier, so that has a whole bunch of information. You can go to our website. You can see some of the things that some of our speakers have created, whether it's books or documentaries or videos. And you can get some information on what we're doing. You can also see, if you go to our website, some of the work we've done around forums regarding Israel and Palestine and the conflict. And it's not anything new for us, too. There's some that go back a few years on there. Yeah, if you'd like to check those out, those are available to you.
Do check out the list of links to Palestine, Israel forums that we've had. Yeah. Who is there? Somebody who is going to introduce our speaker formally?
I'm going to let Daniel develop, his biography, because we were reminded by Fidel Sanchez at the earliest days of ICUJP that this entire journey we're on is a journey to get to know each other. And I love speakers who devote some time to their own background and their own spiritual journey. I am introducing Daniel because he alluded to this. I met Daniel in the rude secular political world at the City Hall. The very notion that the mayor would have a faith-based office, and I'm sure Daniel will define that better than I just did, but it was extraordinary to find such a person, to stand with him, to work with him, and he attended early meetings of ICUJP, and then all of a sudden this Reverend Daniel Tamm, deacon, turned up, and what a delight that was. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, and we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm so delighted to be here. And Rick, thank you for reaching out to you and Stephen inviting me initially to just talk about what I'm engaged in, what I do. And then when Rick asked me for, well, what are you going to call it? And I hadn't thought about that. And I said, and the first thing that came to my mind was, well, the diaconate of all, which is, I'm a deacon. The diaconate means in the Christian tradition, one who serves. And a deacon in the church is one who brings the problems, the concerns, and the hopes of the world to the doorstep of the church. And then, God willing, people mobilize and do something about it. To me, that's the only purpose of religion. The only purpose of religion. Yes, it's good to have a personal relationship with God, as you understand that God. That's essential. No question about it. But coming together as a church, that means bringing people together. And why are you coming together? unless it is to turn your spiritual principles, your faith, your beliefs into action, and what did the Creator have in mind when this all came into being? Such a magnificent, marvelous planet, and human beings, and animals, and rocks, and stars. Obviously, it was to glorify all of this, including each other, and to love each other. Really, in my faith tradition, I'm part of the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement, which is what our presiding bishop loves to call it. Our baptismal covenant is, will you see Christ in everyone you meet? In other words, see the Redeemer, see redemption, see creativity, see spiritual sustenance in every single person you meet, no exceptions. Will you strive for justice and peace, respecting the dignity of every human being and the dignity of the planet as well? So, taking that to heart, I began discerning this idea initially to become a priest, but then when I learned what deacons do, I said, no, they're my people. They're the people who are they become pains in the neck. They become troublemakers. They become the good troublemakers. I said, no, that's where we're at. Having had a background of political organizing, which came about because the country was kind of reeling in fear in 2002, and the president at the time and his cronies took advantage of that, and not only pulverizing Afghanistan, and how did that work out? But then deciding to go into Iraq. And I thought, wait a minute. If I know that there's no weapons of mass destruction, why don't they know that? So that really ticked me off. And by that time, I'd previously already, even before September 11th, 2001, had another spiritual awakening of sorts, where I knew that I was wholly loved and forgiven by God. That was my experience of it. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't, the clouds didn't open, but it went right into my heart. And really changed my focus on things, such that when I got angry about this run up to the invasion of Iraq, I remembered St. Paul saying, "Be angry, but don't let the sun go down on your anger," which I took to mean do something about it. So I got involved in, I figured John Kerry was going to be the nominee because he was the only one with national security experience. And in those days, that was like essential. And got involved in organizing, grassroots organizing for him. I had been an artistic director of a theater in New York off Broadway, and based on that experience, I kind of knew how to become a grassroots organizer, and just got involved with other people who are also, doing the same thing I was doing. And then almost miraculously, Kerry became the nominee, and we became the Kerry campaign in California. And then out of that, I met Antonio Villaraigosa, who was very much involved in the Kerry campaign. And he asked me to run his campaign in the San Fernando Valley because he was running for mayor. And I did. And we won the Valley by 6%, by the way. And he became mayor. And then people started offering me work as a political organizer, and they were willing to pay me. Unbelievable. So that was my background all the way up to meeting Barack Obama and getting involved in his campaign and on his staff, and where I learned a huge amount, going out to Missouri to live in rural Missouri after being in California, and you know, really needing to learn how to be with people who were different from me. You know, here I was, this New Yorker, Californian from LA, coming to rural Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, to run the Missouri campaign there. We thought we could salvage it. We almost did, but not quite. But really understanding that, and really learning about people who really love their country. And I had two experiences of people there. One was the local Democrats who, when I showed up, said, "We're not going to work for the black man." I said, "Okay, thank you very much. Don't ever come into my office again. Goodbye." And then the people, the independents actually, who came in and said, "What can we do?" And who sometimes would not, thankfully it was the fall and it was getting dark, and they wouldn't show up until a little bit later. And some of them came in the back door because they were people who had businesses in the town, and they were afraid of retaliation, and you know, because they were working for Obama. This is 2008, okay, in rural Missouri, and that really opened my eyes to the reality of what we deal with in this country. So from there, we almost won that election in Missouri, but then from there, obviously we won. And then I had met a fellow named Eric Garcetti, who was one of literally a handful of endorsers of Obama in 2007. And I had organized something called Common Good Campaigns, and he asked me to work on, I did some consulting work for the campaign. And after we won, he said, "You want to stay on the team?" And I said, "Yeah." And they offered me be the West area representative to represent the mayor on the west side of LA. And he said, "Oh, by the way, I've heard you're in discernment for the diacon, to become a deacon. Would you head up? Would you organize like a faith-based, be my faith-based liaison, interfaith liaison?" I said, "Great, happy to." And created something called the mayor's Interfaith Collective, which was a group of faith leaders from all over Los Angeles. And I got to meet and really fall in love with all of these people from all these different traditions. And it really spoke to something that was in my heart all the time anyway, but I didn't really know it, was that humanity is a magnificent, marvelous creation. And people, speaking from their heart and living based on truth, compassion, justice, hope, love were people to hang out with. So from there, I met Marcia, and she was organizing a march, and I sat in with them on organizing it so that I could be a liaison with the mayor's office, and it was incredible. We ended up having this gathering. Oh, the reason being, what's his name had become president by this time, and we recall the ban on travel from Muslim countries. It's almost incredible when you even think of it today. Well, that along, with the rise in Islamophobia, the rise, the constant rise in anti-Semitism, really mobilized Marcia and Soraya Dean, and they organized this march. And out of that came Interfaith Solidarity Network. And in 2020, I was elected chair. I stuck with them, and we were doing more work. I was elected chair, and we started focusing. We wanted to have some kind of, yes, we were always going to be building relationships and breaking down barriers among us, but to also do some justice work. So we chose housing justice and eco-justice, or climate justice. The climate justice work migrated to LA Faith and Ecology Network, which is where I'm involved as well. But the housing justice has continued on. And I would like to, if I may, and so anyway, so that's why I called it the Diacon of the Fall, because of being involved in service. And we had a little conversation about the title, and then I said, well, how about interfaith engagement to save democracy? And that resonated with Steve, and so I said it almost like half kidding in a way, because it sounds a little grandiose, but really, when you think about it, interfaith engagement, what does it take to be involved in interfaith work? It takes an open mind, an open heart. It takes spiritual maturity. In other words, that I feel very confident in my own skin as a follower of Jesus. And I feel just as confident in your capacity to be a follower of Allah, to be Jewish, to be Hindu, to respond to Buddha. The core of my of where I identify myself is following Jesus. So who speaks to all of these things, and all of these things speak back to me. What I wanted to show you was a flyer for Yes on ULA Interfaith Canvas in the Valley, being held at Temple Beth Hillel. Join the Yes on Measure ULA campaign. Clue, Interfaith Solidarity Network, and Temple Beth Hillel for an interfaith community canvas in the San Fernando Valley. So what we chose at ISN was that, yes, we're going to get involved in political action. We cannot endorse candidates on the basis of our 501c3 status, But if there are really salient campaigns happening, we're going to get involved in those things. So we got involved with the Yes on ULA campaign. We had a Zoom call about it with the organizers that we shared with people to invite people to come look and see what this is about. We went out canvassing, and this past week, we're beginning to celebrate the year anniversary of ULA. And here is what has happened over the course of the last 11 months because of Measure ULA. It's raised $215 million for affordable housing, tenant protections, and homelessness prevention. That's helping people stay in their homes. Kept 11,000 Angelenos housed by providing much needed rental assistance. And then allocated funding to produce 795 new affordable homes, the construction of which is creating 10,000 union construction jobs. Tomorrow, they're going to be doing their last canvassing for a new initiative that's going to provide permanent funding for this. But I bring this up because this is a direct result of people coming together in coalition. That coalition is called Our Future Los Angeles, by the way, to take a seemingly intractable issue like homelessness and break it down and figure out what do we actually need, and take it out of the hands of politicians and put it into the hands of housing policy specialists and experts who really collectively can come up with meaningful, effective ways of dealing with homelessness. Now, the real way to deal with homelessness is completely change our economic system, to take this unfettered, uncontrollable capitalism and turn it around. You want to keep capitalism? We can keep capitalism, but it's got to be regulated so that it's not hurting people, so that it's not all about greed. And that's what the struggle of the balance for power is seemingly always all about. But in the meantime, until that happens, there are things like Measure ULA and implementing those kinds of laws that really help people. There were all these other things that I wanted to share, photos of people engaged in this stuff. But let me bring it back. Let me bring it back all the way to its source. Last night, I attended an iftar with the Islamic Society of West Valley, one of our partners, one of the partners of ISN, we were able to come into their home in a spirit of salam and greetings of peace, to celebrate with the Muslims who are part of this community the holy month of fasting, Ramadan, and in a very family-friendly event. We spoke about what Ramadan was all about, the spirituality of fasting, and where that brings people in terms of their reflection on their relationship with God. And I felt like they were talking about the Christian season of Lent, because it's something that we do. the Jews do the same thing during holy seasons. Buddhists do it all the time, just in terms of self-reflection and focusing on the interior. We broke the fast with some dates. We went in and we prayed, and we could all, those of us who were non-Muslims could just sit and observe, or we could join in. And myself and Reverend Matthew McHale, the lead minister at Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church, another ISN partner, the two of us just, we went in, we knelt down, and we just followed the whole physical motion of the prayer. And there was something about, kneeling down and then bowing down with our heads, our foreheads on the floor, and then coming up again, and then standing up. There was something in that. In the meantime, our colleague Suhail Mullah was chanting the prayers. I didn't know what he was saying. I knew that it was something about the love of Allah, and the holiness of Allah, and making room for that in ourselves was another spiritual awakening, and to the realization that we all are, we're all unified. We're all of us together on this. We are all interconnected. So how does this save democracy? So anyway, my point is that all this work on ULA, all the work we did on Measure J, all the work we do when we show up at city council, when we write letters to our legislators and advocate with them and meet with them in offices about housing justice and climate action, it all comes from that moment at the mosque where we're lying prostrate with our foreheads touching the floor, acknowledging the creative power, the spirit of generosity, the spirit of love that is in us all. That engagement with each other's spirituality, that interfaith engagement with each other, is a model for what we take out into the world in terms of engaging our fellow citizens, in terms of responding to the deeply disturbed nature of our democracy at the moment and the world. I want to just read a couple of things, refer to a couple of notes, and then I'm going to close. Interfaith cohesive collaboration requires spiritual maturity. Democracy is being degraded by the deliberate use of the propaganda of fear, anxiety, and here is the deliberate cultivation of authoritarianism, which thrives on chaos. And I want to read to you something, and then I'll close, from something called How Your 21st Century Family Works. And you could apply this to any congregation you have, or you can apply it to ICUJP or the United States of America. And here is what he says. It's Peter Stunke. The environment that's been created in this country, and the religious right has known this for a long time. Certainly the conservative right has known this for a long time, is to create anxiety and chaos and fear. For us in this room today and moving forward from here, we need to hold on to our faith values, and also remember that to maintain the belief that we can influence what happens to us. People who are caught up in the right-wing chaos feel like they can't. Things are out of control. We can find meaningful purpose in the turmoil of life. And we can learn from both good and bad experiences. The interfaith experience also requires us to recall that we can move into the public square with other traditions because we want a society where Muslims, Jews, secularists, Buddhists, Hindus, and others can contribute to a rich and vibrant conversation about the common good. And that's where I'll end. Thanks for your time.
If you have questions for Daniel, please just raise your hand.
Steve has one.
Steve, and then Dave.
Thank you, Daniel. Just lovely. I learn more and more about you, which is always a wonderful opportunity. But your thinking on this is so helpful. And I think it's a perfect opportunity to ask a question about separation of church and state.
I
How
believe in it.
Pardon me?
I believe in it.
Good. But there are some who've taken holy orders in the evangelical church and elsewhere that do not believe in separation of church and state. How do you explain that you, with all of your activism from a faith-based perspective, are respecting separation of church and state, whereas those in the pulpit in the South and elsewhere who preach their own values are violating separation of church and state? If you get the essence of my question.
That's a really good question, Steve. And this is where this is where it really calls for a strong sense of humility on my part and other people who do what I do. That we are not, and there's differences. I think the spiritual maturity that I talked about before, but really it's the humility, the sense that I know that I could be wrong, about all kinds of things, and that it's not about, and it's really the work that I try to stay focused on is coming alongside marginalized communities and looking for the leaders among them and lifting them up to respond to the same values that I find in the gospel, just in terms of poverty and exploitation. Let me share a story. Here's maybe where the difference lies. Let me share a story about Mike Pence, who was accepting the nomination for the Republican nomination in 2020. He closed his acceptance speech with a little bit of biblical sleight of hand. So this is about, like, using, sacred texts and reinterpreting them. He was in front of a big crowd there in Baltimore, and he said, let's fix our eyes on Old Glory and all that she represents. Let's fix our eyes on the land of heroes and let their courage inspire. He basically rewrote a text from the book of Hebrews. And that text says, let's fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. Now, people have, exploited, sacred texts before, melding religion and politics on the campaign trail. And we're going to have a lot more of that ahead in 2024. Still, it was Pence's decision to replace Jesus with the stars and stripes, I think, made people feel like, well, wait a minute, this isn't what's there in the book. So the point I'm trying to make is that, interpreting everything in the Bible as being about the supremacy, of the white Christian. White Christian nationalism is about that everything should be run by Christians. Everything, from the school board to the White House, should be run by Christians. And their sense is that the enemy is at the gates. Anyway, so I hope that answered the.
Oh, let me just a quick follow-up, which is our opportunity. I think you've so well captured it. I think the enemies of separation of church and state and exclusive, they exclude others from the political sphere and from democracy. And I believe Martin Luther King, yourself, and others are inclusive and recognize that we cannot allow any particular religion to be above and superior to the Constitution and to individual rights that each of us enjoy. And the flashing of a new Trump Bible is a perfect example of the threat that's posed by a theocracy. And that's what white supremacy, the supremacy piece, is to elevate the Bible and religious teaching over the Constitution itself.
Anthony.
Hi there. Well, I noticed, Daniel, that you have a background in spiritual direction, and so do I, and done a lot of work with compassionate listening. So I want to raise another issue. Certainly what's happening in Gaza is a political crisis. It's a moral crisis. And it's also a spiritual one. A lot of Jews are hurting, traumatized. So are a lot of Palestinians and Muslims. It's a time when, in my experience, because I do a lot of work with interfaith, there's a lot of pain going around. And I know that when I've had to go to events and stand in solidarity with, the cause of freeing Palestine and calling for a ceasefire, it can be very painful for my Jewish friends. And I have tried my best to keep that in mind doing this work, that we certainly want to be firm in our commitment to ending the violence in Gaza and bringing humanitarian aid, but also we want to bring about the beloved community. So I wanted to see how you're dealing with that, because I think it's a huge challenge for the interfaith movement right now. How do you deal with the painful feelings and the trauma that's being experienced by Jews and Muslims, and how do help bring together
Hmm.
our community?
I think that's such a wonderful question. Thank you. We were organizing an event. We ask so much of the people who receive our mailings and who respond to, who work with us. We so much advocacy work for housing justice, climate action. We're constantly asking people to, show up at this, California Public Utilities Commission and tell them stop, eviscerating rooftop solar and just things like that. And we realized, or maybe let's find out what they want to do, our partners. So, because we've been asking so much of them, it's time for us to really get together with our partners and say, well, is this okay? What do you want to do? And this was in September of last year, early September. And we started organizing something called the Soul of Interfaith Partnership. The event was coming together in person to break bread because there's no substitute for that. As great as this is here, it's wonderful to come together and break bread together, especially where relationships are really formed. And it was scheduled for October 19th of last year. And right in the middle of it was October 7th. So in the meantime, I had invited Muslim, Sheikh Suhail Mullah, Father Alexei Smith, Rabbi Heather Miller, to be the ones who kind of like begin the conversation, and then we'll open it up out to the crowd. And I have wonderful photos of that event, which I cannot show you. And we met on the phone and said, well, okay, here we are. Here is a moment that's really going to test us. And I wasn't even sure if everybody was going to show up for this Zoom call. The three participants, the Muslim and the Jew, were they going to show up? I mean, knowing them as I know them, yes, I knew they were going to show up, but I knew it was going to be really hard. What do we say to each other? And so we just decided that, we in this event, it's not going to be about relitigating 1948, but we just have to be honest about what we feel. And we have to create an environment where people really just listen to each other and are respectful of each other, and still have our feelings. So we showed up at the event, I think 50, 70 people. I can't remember how many people. It was a really good turnout for it. And the first thing I asked was, what is on your heart? And Sheikh Mullah responded first, and he started talking about grieving. Anger? Yes, but deep, profound grieving. And it turns out that everyone had a piece of that they could share, and the whole room. So the event really became the central movement of the event was grieving. And fear. Our friend Nabila Khan got up and talked about her children being harassed at school because they're Muslim. I think in answer to your question, Anthony, is that not to go away from it, but to go right towards it and come with a full and open heart, with love, and with sharing our anger and our fear and our grief. And I think at that time we were very much, that was the initial stages of our grieving process. Now I think we are, by the end of the month, we had an initial statement. The day after, we came out before the end of the month, knowing what was going to happen, what had already begun, and where things were going. Of where we deplored the policies of mutual annihilation that both seem to be pursuing, both sides of it, and then calling for a ceasefire, but really, even more so, getting underneath, the problems that are existing, that have existed for ages, and dealing with true compassion, true justice, because without that, there can be no lasting peace. And now I think we're seeing things unfold where I see you can see the little subtle changes in American response, scolding on the one hand, but still sending the arms. So there's I think we're seeing where that's evolving, and in the meantime, staying close to each other here and just continuing to talk with each other and to meet with each other. And last night was a perfect example of that, showing up at the iftar, and a number of ISN members showed up, but others from around the valley, and just continue to learn about each other, and just keep an open mind and maintain our humility.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
All right, Dave.
I want to thank you for your presentation. And one of the parts that caught my attention was your experiences in Missouri. Missouri, we say, right?
In some places in Missouri, they say Missouri. In other places, they say Missouri.
Okay.
Much to my surprise. I take your point.
When I was in Port Gerardo, I learned to say Missouri, but other parts may be different. So I really value your experience in working one-on-one with potential voters in the Obama campaign in Sedalia, Missouri. And I think everyone should have that experience, going door to door, meeting people face to face. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about the next election, as a political activist, as a grassroots organizer, and as a Christian, how there may be one half of our country may vote for a candidate we haven't even named today, but one half of our country apparently shares values that we don't share. And something must be happening. I think you also referred to people who don't benefit from the system under which we live. How do we can't, I don't think we can demonize 50% of our fellow citizens. So how do we reach out? How do we come to understand why they are so alienated from that segment of the establishment? I'm talking about the Democratic National Committee, Joe Biden. They're so alienated from that world. How do you, what are they getting right? Sometimes they get some things right. And in the areas where we have such deep personal and political disagreements, how do you think about reaching out to the one half of our population who feel so differently about so many issues from us? Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to drop into the chat a link to something called the 22nd Century Conference. This is about forging a people-powered democracy. Gathers the pro-democracy movement to weave relationships, sharpen strategies, and equip people with skills and resources to effectively block the rise of the authoritarian right while advancing pro-democracy strategies and campaigns. And I'm going to suggest that you might find something, in there to along the lines of a trying to look for meeting group chat. Okay. Of how to respond to it. There was this one guy that I've heard recently, because I've been really looking into the rise of white Christian nationalism lately, and this very thing. How do you really deal with it? And this one guy talked about. There's another thing I'm going to put. Disarming Leviathan. Just kind of Google that and see what comes up. This guy told a story about something happening locally in Texas. For him, he's a pastor of a Christian church, and he was, and some of his congregants were saying, "Hey, are you coming to the?" I forget the name of it, but the Turning Point revival. Are you going to come to that? And he said, "Well, what is that?" He said, "Oh, this great thing. It's really fantastic." And so he thought, "All right, I'll show up and see what it's all about." And he showed up. And it wasn't looking like a political event. It was looking like a revival, a Christian revival. And he thought, okay, well, we'll see. And he said, this guy started out not talking like a politician, but everything he was saying, he was going, he got everybody all revved up like like any second-rate, evangelist can do. And he said, and because the Bible says, we should not have people, men and women should be together. It's not same sex. And then he kept doing all these things and saying, and the Bible says, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, the Bible doesn't say anything like that. So, and he went to conferences. He became part of a sort of a leadership circle because he really wanted to get inside. And then he realized that he needed to do three things. He needed to, first of all, meet people on their own ground. And then he needed to find common ground. And he talked about a meeting with this woman who was talking about, well, I'm afraid about, he was asking about her fear of immigrants. He said, well, I'm afraid they're going to take over the country, and I'm not going to be able to, when I go to the grocery store, I'm going to have to speak Spanish, and I'm not going to be able to, I won't be able to speak English anymore because they're going to take over the country and it's going to be Spanish only. He said, oh, where do you hear that that's going to happen? And by asking subversive questions in a very humble way, how do you think that's going to happen? She said, well, the Bible says that. Where do you see that in the Bible? Where does that happen? And not being belligerent or aggressive, but just humbly asking questions, and to keep questioning, asking questions. So if you choose to converse with someone who feels that way, humbly asking questions, and then setting the table was his third thing. Create an environment, invite people one-on-one to coffee or to lunch, or to create lunches with people, and really people who don't feel the same way you feel about things, and invite people to sit down and really talk about things in a humble way along those lines, breaking bread together. And his experience was that many people that their theories began to crumble because they couldn't find it in the Bible. They couldn't cite anything. And they couldn't cite any kind of actual change in their lives. Yes, there were these new people. Oh, he was saying, well, I think Jesus tells me that we need to welcome the stranger, and that we need to, all the Beatitudes are all about, blessed are the poor, they shall see the kingdom of God. So we need to, come alongside the poor people. And so anyway, so that's one strategy. The other strategy, from a political standpoint, don't deal with the no's, deal with the maybes, the undecideds, and reinforce your yeses. That's political organizing 101. And I hope that people, a good strategy is to get involved in phone banks or text banks to battleground states with good organizations that have really done the research and are able to locate voters who are persuadable, meaning that they're undecided for the most part, and they can have conversations, and to deal with the people who have maybe not yet made up their minds. And if people have not yet made up their minds, they are persuadable. And I would just, as a political organizer, that's what I would do. As a Christian, I would do the other strategy and take the time. It's painstaking, but we don't have a lot of time. It's 2024. It's already April. In a matter of months, this campaign is really going to be in full swing. And I would recommend text banking or phone banking to battleground states. Choose where you want to go. Is it Virginia? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Michigan? Pennsylvania probably is still going to be in play, unbelievably, but so. Nevada, you want to take trips to Nevada? Join a local Democratic Party and get involved in a bus trip to Nevada to walk precincts, or walk precincts just north of the city of Los Angeles in Santa Clarita, and see if you can change that now Republican congressional district back to Democratic. That would be my advice.
Huh.
And I don't give advice.
All right, Rose.
I'm coming from a different angle completely. I mean, I love everything you said, don't get me wrong, but I'm just interested in your role as a deacon. As I said at the beginning, I think they're probably the only other Episcopal on this call, and probably the only other person from the Valley as well. So there's quite a lot there. But at St. Michael's and All Angels, as you know, Patty Sells is the deacon. And we've had attempts. We had an anti-racist committee that out of a not very large congregation, of a lesser congregation, I think we managed to get up to 5 or 6 people. And we were quite active for a while doing things, but basically the priest kind of decided that it was getting too divisive in the congregation. So it kind of died out. And so I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I just wanted to get information about your organization, which sounds as if it's Valley-based. I wondered if you could put in the chat how to get onto your mailing list. And maybe I'd talk to Patty about maybe working more kind of collaboratively with that, because there's a little frustration in our congregation that, our good liberals are not quite as liberal as you think they might. I hope they might be.
Thank you, Rose. Yeah, I just put our www.interfaithsolidaritynetwork.org in the. You can sign up for. Once a week we come out with something that talks about either events of partners that we're helping to promote, or democracy actions, or spiritual practices. It's a mixture of things. This week it was a notice about the iftar, followed by something that Clue is doing to attract young people for internships for the summer, to working among marginalized communities, and also an announcement about our event in May 19th, which is called One Heart, Music for Building Peace, Inspiring Hope, and Spreading Love. That's happening May 19th. And
where?
It's going to be, I'll tell you in 1 second. It will be at, I'm sorry,
Encino Presbyterian
Church. That's Balboa Boulevard, just south of 101. I'll put that RSVP link into the chat as well. That's Sunday, May 19th. Program starts at 4. It goes for just over an hour. It's music, dance, spoken word, all about those themes. It's also, we're doing this in partnership with Councilwoman Nithya Rahman, who wanted to work with us on something. So she'll be sharing some remarks about how her council district office, strives to build peace, inspire hope, and spread love. And she's done some remarkable work on homelessness as chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee in the City Council. So she'll be there as well. And then it'll be followed by a meal provided by the LA Sikh community. The Sikhs of Los Angeles will be providing us with their marvelous hospitality. So it'll be music, dance, poetry, food. What's not to love?
Thank you.
I'm going to put that
sorry.
RSVP in the. I've already responded. It's not letting me. All right, let me see if I can just cut and paste the RSVP and see what happens for that.
While you're doing that, I'd just like to
Yes.
say, as an ex-board member, I think it would be great if several members of ICUJP came to that event. I mean, it sounds like a great networking event, and one of the things we used to talk about was getting the Sikh community involved in ICUJP, and here's a wonderful opening. I will definitely try to get to that.
Thank you, Ruth. I just dropped what I thought was the RSVP link, but it's not translating. But if you go to the website, I think there'll be an opportunity. You'll be able to do it there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And let me just say, Ruth, that I share your frustration.
Rose.
Our Episcopal brothers and sisters really, they have every opportunity for getting engaged with justice work. But I think the church is still transitioning out of its kind of sense of privilege and white supremacy, I should add. And they're still coming out of that. For a long time, I would imagine if you counted American presidents, male presidents, the most number of presidents were Episcopalians. And I think that is, I know that is definitely changing. And the church has been in decline for years. The more it got into decline, the more it was interesting to me somehow, because I'm responding to the essential message. And Ruth, if you just keep beating the drum.
Rose.
Daniel.
It's
all right. Don't worry.
Rose, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Rose. I beg your pardon. Forgive me. Rose, much more beautiful name. If you just keep beating the drum and keep inviting people, that's the thing. I'm working out a couple of days a week at a ministry center in Riverside, where on the church property they've built 50 units of permanent supportive housing for people who had been experiencing homelessness. And so these are people who are just now having homes after years of being homeless. The bishop wanted me to sort of like experiment with how do we have a relationship with these folks without proselytizing? So, I have these spiritual practices, things that I do on Wednesday afternoons, and I keep I go around and I keep inviting them. I knock on the door and I talk with them on their doorsteps. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm from over there, over at the church. What's your name? And we talk about things, and like, oh, here's an invitation. We're doing some spiritual practices over there. And by the way, you don't have to believe in anything. And if you walk out of there with believing whatever you believed when you walked in there, that's okay. It's not about believing what we're doing. It's just finding, seeing, just experimenting and seeing if you have a need or a facility that you want to develop of, being in relationship with your higher power. That's all it's about. One person has shown up after months, and then a couple of other people showed up. And then nobody shows up from that community. But that's not my job. Is not will people show up. My job is to extend the invitation. So go for it, Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we move in very similar circles. You keep mentioning names and things. Nithya, definitely. Anyway, I will pass on to somebody else.
Yes. So Carol asked me to speak to the statement from Sibyl that I posted in the chat about the ceremony of the red heifer that Christian Zionists are proposing to do with the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. They have grave concerns that this is going to touch off a religious war and make the suffering in Jerusalem much more, expansive. It appears that some US-based Christian Zionists in Texas have bred this genetically modified red heifer to align with the description in some scriptures of how this heifer is supposed to be sacrificed to cleanse a priest and then ultimately build a third temple for the Antichrist to destroy and the Messiah to come. And this hasn't been done in 2,000 years, but science has helped bring this about. And they want to do this ceremony in an area where it's in the Haram al-Sharif area, which includes the Dome of the Rock, and would require that the current mosque there be destroyed or relocated, or so it's going to cause a lot of dissent. It already is, this plan. The heifer is supposed to be flown at the cost of millions of dollars to Jerusalem. So they signed this this statement. A lot of religious leaders have signed the statement, and they're urging all Christian organizations and leaders to come out and condemn this this plan, and to call out these Christian Zionists. So just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
I just wanted to say there is actually a book I have read that is that exact story. I can't remember the author. I was trying to remember. It's a fictional book, but exactly that story, and what happened to the red heifer and all they happened to it. I'll see if I can remember. I read it fairly recently. Just a matter of curiosity there. Mm-hmm.
You remind me too that this authoritarianism that is really what we need to be dealing with. It extends many decades back. Something called the New Right emerged after World War II in the 40s, and it was about completely dismantling the New Deal. The New Deal, which actually helped people who were struggling and helped people survive. And there's people like Paul Weyrich from the American Legislative Exchange Union, Phyllis Schlafly, remember her, from the Eagle Forum, who said that the ERA would take away women's privileges. And cultural conservatives discovered that the fundamentalist Christians were really ripe for advancing the agenda, and they began making inroads among them, and they noticed that the fundamentalist evangelical movement was the fastest growing in the country, and they latched onto it, many of whom already had conservative views. We think of the Proud Boys and the Oath Takers and things like that. They're like nothing compared to some of these earlier groups, and in some instances, they actually think that they're saving the country, but they are compared to some of these other groups earlier on who made these inroads. Their level of insidiousness is relatively low compared to that. But this is what we're dealing with. It's really countering authoritarianism, and this movement that this thing about sacrifices and all of these things, that comes out of that. And by the way, there's nothing in the New Testament about that.
Yeah.
Not a blessed thing.
Can I add one? It's funny you mentioned the Proud Boys, because when I posted this on my Facebook yesterday after I got it from Sabile, and I made the comparison to the Proud Boys. I said, well, Trump has his Proud Boys, and Biden has these Christian Zionists that are going over there and making things worse. I mean, Biden has identified as I'm a Zionist, and so it's just really it's really scary to me. And I'll point to some things in the statement. It says that in the face of this madness, we call on all persons of goodwill to condemn this plan by the Temple Institute to engage in a sacrifice of so-called red heifer. Especially, we call on Christians around the world to lovingly correct and reprove fellow Christians who have been deluded by any form of the imperialist, colonial, and war-promoting ideology of Christian Zionism. There was one other statement in here.
Rebecca, I'm going to push back a little on your defining Joe Biden along these lines. I think he's very low grade as far as that's concerned. He's nothing like his foreign policy, his main foreign policy organizer, Anthony Blinken, is working strenuously to counter all of that sensibility and all of Netanyahu's prosecuting the way he's prosecuting this war. Yes, he has there's a very powerful lobby in the United States that is pushing and pushing and pushing. But I give Joe Biden this much credit, which is that I know he sees the bigger picture as an internationalist. That is his training, that is his understanding, and he's taking all of these different parties, into account, and he's trying to really make sense of the whole thing. The iftar that he held at the White House was boycotted by Muslims recently for the ongoing support. So he's hearing the message in his to the extent that he's going to be able to respond. I'm confident that he'll be able to. Maybe not as far as we want him to, but he's not interested in keeping Netanyahu in power. He knows there needs to be a change, and they're working in back channels to affect that.
He'll have his chance because they plan to sacrifice this heifer on April 21st.
Okay, I have no control over that.
He and Lincoln can speak up to it. That's what they're calling for, is for all Christians to speak up.
Thank you. I see Dr. Ruby, I see iPhone, and I see Stephen again.
I've got some great takeaways from your talk, Daniel. But when you were talking about Biden, I was watching Kel Francis's body language, and I agree with it. In short, I think Biden is kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth, and I'm not sure why he's doing that. And I am deeply troubled by the fact that Biden isn't taking a more aggressive stance on it.
Daniel, I wanted to go deeper into your answer to Dave Clennon, because how do we speak to others? And I think we have to realize that in the 2016 election, Trump was competing with Sanders for voters. Sanders had put his finger on resentment, grievance, being forced outside of our liberal democracy. So I think we have that coming back around again, and you were beginning to get to it. But how do we speak, at the dinner table with the crazy uncle, or, in a social setting. I met a guy for a half hour. I was talking to him and enjoying the conversation, and learned he was a Trumper last night. Time didn't allow for an expanded conversation, but you said humility, but how do we talk to people who do feel a grievance? There's the great replacement theory out of France and applied here in America, but that's because they are identifying the white majority is now feeling aggrieved and pushed aside. And how do we talk to them in this season?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I can go a little deeper into that. I think we need to start by being in a healthy spot ourselves. Because I know for myself, it's really hard to speak to people that I think are just dead wrong. So I can't start from that place. I have to really work on myself, my own spirituality, be in a healthy spot, deal with my own heart, my own shame, my own rage and anxiety, and to recognize that and do that work, because that's what's going on here. Shame, rage, and anxiety. That's where this is coming from for people. They want some kind of sense of agency. They don't feel like they have it. What I think, so if we do that work on ourselves and recognize that people are coming from that place as well, someone is caught up. They're caught up in something, so seek to restore them to who they are as children of God. Study the culture, and then just ask questions. Why is that important to you? So with that crazy uncle or whatever at the table, oh yeah, Uncle Steve, so why is that important to you? And let them talk. And, remember, Jesus flipped tables, but he spent a lot more time setting tables. So setting tables of hospitality. So either metaphorically or actually doing that. And then show when people talk about situations where they dire situations about immigrants or LGBTQ people, or and by the way, the thing that Phyllis Schlafly was so concerned about with the ERA, with the Equal Rights Amendment for Women, she thought, and this is decades ago, she said that, well, one day we're going to have bathrooms that men and women can use. And isn't that horrible? So Phyllis Schlafly, your fears have been realized. So when someone's talking about a situation that they're describing as dangerous and threatening, identify with the fear. Said, when you say that, Uncle Steve, I feel fear. What do you feel about it? And what do you feel is doing it? Connect with their values, in other words. And maybe they're going to say, well, I want safety for my children. I want safety since, well, I want safety too. I want my child to be safe. I want to live in safely. Just connect on that level. And then if they're quoting scripture, or if you're able to, quote something that says, well, Jesus says something about, really loving people as love my neighbor as myself. Who is my neighbor? Let's talk about who are my neighbors, and then just keep following the question to its logical conclusion, asking humbly subversive questions.
This is probably, we don't really have time to explore this, but I'm really troubled by where to stand with Biden. I'm appalled by what Biden has done. I absolutely am horrified. On the other hand, Schumer and Biden have come out critical of Netanyahu. They're come out in support of humanitarian aid. There has been some movement. In contrast, Mike Johnson is calling for inviting Netanyahu to speak before the House of Representatives. The Republicans are utterly opposed to any kind of support for the Gazans and are totally in favor of what Netanyahu is doing. So we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think we need to push Biden. We need to do everything we can to change his behavior and his attitude. But God forbid that Trump gets elected and the Republicans are in charge. That will be the death knell for the Palestinians.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, we can be, Biden wasn't my choice in the Democratic primaries. But when he came, I knew the alternative was disastrous. He's a politician. I trust him just enough to vote for him over the other guy. But there's a lot, there's still areas of trust that I'm gonna have to, are just gonna have to catch up, because there's I'm not happy either. But with him, we have a chance. And that's the difference. With the other guy, I don't know, maybe, armed revolution. I have no idea. But, in politics, you just keep asking the question. You keep showing up, you keep saying, well, and you keep pushing back. The reality is, if a city council person gets 100 calls to her office about, I want you to take, compassionate, decisive action to change the whole nature of how we're dealing with homelessness in the city, she's going to respond to that, because 100 people have called the office with that message. If just a few people here or there are, squawking about things, they're not going to really pay attention. But if there's an organized, consistent, effort to make change for the better, politicians have to respond to it. They need your votes, especially if you're a constituent. If you're from another district, well, they don't need your vote. But if you're from their district, they need your vote. You're a member of Congress, and ultimately your president as well. Let us pray. Holy being, we call you by many names: higher power, the source of creativity and love and wisdom, the spirit of generosity, the spirit of humor and kindness. We thank you for bringing us together today to abide in justice and peace as the world you want to have, Creator, and that we want to live in. Strengthen us, enlighten us, inspire us to be hopeful people. We don't have to be optimistic, but we can be hopeful that things can get better if we're engaged in a loving compassionate, and just way to create the world that you want. Wherever we live, wherever we are, there's always something we can do. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And we thank you for reminding us that today. In all the names that are holy, we pray. Amen.